Welcome to Culmination, where we're not experts, but we sure have a lot to say. In the process of becoming our best self, I have with me the aspiring chemist, Madison Boni, to discuss perfectionism. And with that said, let's get started. So, what is perfection? Paint me a picture of what that looks like.
So, in my view, perfection is as best as humanly possible. There are no errors. It depends on the situation, but there's a standard at which the smallest error doesn't detract from the whole. It's not noticeable.
So it's just like the ideal, no flaws.
Yeah. Even when you zoom in on all the details, there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, so how could you envision that into like your life or just anyone's life in general? Like paint a picture of an average school day, if you will, that is perfect.
I would get up at a time that I feel well rested, um, not bothered by any external factors or stressors, which tend to show up a lot as perfectionism can lead to stress and all those fun mental things. Um, there wouldn't be any driving accidents, or no one would drive slow in front of me getting to school. I would um, do all the assignments in all my classes ahead of time, get a 100% on them. Same with tests. There would be no noticeable errors on them. Everything would just go, first of all, as planned, but also within the constraints that I set for myself and that others expect of me.
Mm-hmm. So, what does the reality usually look like? And try to be critical in the sense that if you may feel, I don't know, like maybe down sometimes or self deprecating, uh, try to just think critically, like an average day with the good and the bad.
So I tend to wake up late, um, or I'll set my alarm 10 minutes later so I can get that extra bit of sleep that never really tends to help, so that I'm tired throughout most of the day. Thankfully, I haven't had any accidents driving, so that's not something I've been concerned about in terms of what goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I generally don't always have all my homework finished. I have a study hall, or I had a study hall in the past year that I'll just cram everything into. Um, Along with that, I am not the most study intensive person. I just think I can cram everything in just the same way I do with my homework. Study for 20 minutes beforehand, and then I don't achieve that standard. Uh,
What standard do you achieve, if I may ask?
Generally, better than average, but not at the level that I want to be, which is as close to perfection as possible.
So maybe like 85% to like maybe a generous 95%.
Yeah, that generally.
But your ideal as a perfectionist is 100%, right?
Yeah, and I think that's very relatable for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, I mean, I think we can all assume here why you would want to get a 100 on that test. But why does it, like, when we understand the magnitude of grades, where it does matter, but I mean, think about it from a realistic standpoint. As long as you get above a 90, according to like most average grading scales, you have an A. And whether you get a 100% or somewhere in the 90s, you still get an A. So, with that said, like, if you consistently get like even 91s or something, why does it matter to get a 100%? Like, I know you want that. And I'm speaking like you as in general and not specifically you. Um, but why does it matter so much?
Well, because there's so much stress associated with having a grade that's borderline, because it could, if it's a 90 or 91, it could go either to an A or a B. But if you have a consistent, like, high A, you don't think it's going to go anywhere. So you're not stressing about your grades. And then you're able to live your life with much less anxiety.
But aren't you living in a lot of anxiety trying to get that high grade?
Yes, there's not really a good way around it, because if I don't work hard, then I'll have anxiety about getting a bad grade. But if I do put forth my best effort and I also don't get a bad grade, I'll have more anxiety because it'll just be a self-deprecating loop. But then
Mhm.
once I reach, like, um, as close to perfection as I can on anything, I'll have that standard in mind for the next time, and I'll put so much stress on myself trying to reach it in the future.
Hmm. So what do you think we can do about that?
Set a lower standard, but that's not always realistic.
Hmm. I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't know. Something rubs me the wrong way hearing that. Just personally, like lower standard. Because I get what you're saying, because obviously that would help. Because if you have a lower standard, then it's like you're gonna avoid the stress and the disappointment. But I don't know, I'm trying to think here, and it's not necessarily that I have the answer or like a better answer at that, but I don't know. Maybe I think it's less about the expectation, and this is personal, or like my opinion, of course. But I think it's less about the expectation and more about just how much magnitude and value you put into it in general. Because the reason why there's so much stress, from what I presume, and from my own experience, is because you just hold that grade with such magnitude. Like this grade, if I don't get a 100, like I'm screwed basically. And that the expectation kind of goes along with it. But I feel like there's a differentiation there, you know?
Yeah, and I also think it's a lot about, I try to make it about how much effort I put into it. Like, if I put in a lot of effort, I'll feel good. Well, I'll at least feel better about how I did regardless of the grade, or just like what a teacher tells me I did on that. And I think I've heard that a lot from, like, my family, my early childhood teachers. There wasn't really a lot of pressure to get an A all the time. And
Yeah.
I think I self-imposed my own standards and may have took them too far, because the adults in my life had reasonable expectations of me, and I just wanted to always do better. And that just led to trying too hard in everything and not having a reasonable expectation almost ever.
This may be a hard question for you to necessarily answer because you just might not know, but why do you think you wanted that? Like wanted to be better from your
Well,
own like gain and everything?
yeah, I don't have any older siblings, so there wasn't something for me to go off of. I was kind of just setting my own trail as I went along.
Mhm.
And I don't really know if there was a defining moment or anything, but throughout probably my preschool and kindergarten into first and second grade, I went to more of a, like, artistic based school where grades weren't more a ton of the focus of a lot of the students,
Yeah.
but I still felt that because not all the other students were focusing on them, I could be better than them just by turning in all my assignments or putting in extra effort, even though I may have not felt more satisfied with what I turned out.
Yeah. What do you think goes into that idea of like wanting to be better? Like you just wanted to I don't know, I'll let you answer.
I mean, there's a psychology aspect to it, which sounds like too much to analyze, but um, everyone at least tries to, well, not necessarily tries to, but generally subconsciously becomes or tries to be better than others in some area, just because they're worse in another. And I
Hmm.
think that maybe for some people it's grades or art or whatever it is. You can make up for whatever you're not as good at by stressing yourself out in a different area to be better.
Or like a specialty.
Yeah.
And you think, I mean, to me, that sounds kind of neutral. Like wanting that specialty, wanting to rise above in one aspect. Like, I mean, you can take that what you will, you know? Like,
Hmm.
whether that means just working hard or stressing yourself out and becoming a perfectionist. I don't know. I don't. That would make sense, though, you know?
Yeah.
So, now I'll ask you this. Are there some good things about being a perfectionist?
Well, I think it would be definitely good to have perfectionism in some scenarios because obviously in things like being a construction worker or a doctor, if you do something wrong in your profession and mess something up, it could have a horrible impact on many people. But
That's a good example.
yeah, there's always going to be a negative mental health aspect to trying your hardest as much as you can, but there's also going to be the positive of um, when you're not feeling your best in everything, you can at least focus on something to push yourself towards.
Right. And we don't always need to be good at everything, you know?
Hmm.
I think that can. I'm not sure how many different types of perfectionism there are. Um, but I feel like for me at least, something that I've gone through, although I don't know if I'm exactly a perfectionist. Um, I have tendencies, but for the sake of this story, I've noticed that sometimes I want to be good at everything. Like I want to, in terms of this podcast, for an example, it's like I want to be good at speaking, want to be good at networking with guests and everything. I want to be good at art and editing and stuff, like the behind the scenes stuff. Like I want to be good at music so I can make the music for this. Like I'm trying to be a one man band here. Like the not even the jack of all trades, but the master of all trades, you know?
Yeah, I completely relate to that. Like, I've started to realize that whenever I have like a new friend or someone in my life and they have something that they're specifically good at, I will
Hmm.
start trying to learn it to become better at them just because I feel worse than them in one area. And that's not
Hmm.
healthy.
I don't find it for me, it's not a competitive sense. It's just like well, I think for me, honestly, it's like I just don't like relying on people. So it's like I really don't want to have to wait and deal with the dude to like I don't want to give him the audio files so he can edit the video. I would rather just do it myself at any time that I can or want to, just get it done. So I feel like the proficiency or need to be proficient in something is more about just being independent because I don't like dealing with people, which has its good sides and downsides, but that might be a reason.
Well, also, like, you don't want to have to rely on people. It seems that if someone doesn't do everything that you wanted them to do at the standard or level that you expected of them, because you would expect that of yourself, you'll get mad at them over something that you could have just controlled by doing it yourself.
Right. It takes the control out of your hands, like you said.
Hmm.
Um, although I'm not sure if it's exactly perfectionism because it's like I don't go into it saying I'm gonna go master editing and master music production and do all this. I'm just like I mainly dabble in it, so I'm like, all right, this is good enough. So it might be a bad example, but I can definitely see somebody who just wants to be perfect at everything. Like as we talked about in the beginning of the episode, like just wants this completely rose-tinted glass romantic view of the world where everything goes right, you know?
Yeah. And I think more so recently than not, I've shifted the focus of having all my grades and academics be as perfect because I've realized it's not always realistic to get an A in every class, but I've shifted that mindset towards other things, like in particular, like artistic or sports things, where I don't have as much as experience as other people who are way better than me, and I'll still expect that I am as good as them, even though I've only had, 6 months of training in comparison to years.
Right. I think it's another thing when you take like a really good piano player who's been playing for all of their life. It's like you just see them playing now, and it's like, wow, they're so good. I want to sit down at the piano and do that. Like basically play like Elton John. Um, but when you do, it's like, well, it just doesn't work. You know, it doesn't
Yeah.
translate because you see this person playing this instrument or doing whatever after years of climb and struggle. And I don't know, we just don't see that for obvious reasons. So I think in a sense we have this false narrative or false expectation that we should be as good or better when we completely ignore the facts, basically.
Yeah.
And I feel like insecurities in general are just weird in that way, you know?
I agree with that.
Like it's so critical, and critical is like, you know, analytical, breaks down things, like dissecting your psyche. But it's critical in the sense that it's like it's so biased, you know?
I think
Like
there's also
yeah.
like a hyper focus, especially in particular areas. Like when you see, to use your example, when you see someone who's playing piano really well, you just want to go learn piano and just focus on that for so long, or not necessarily long, but just very intense. And then you'll think you'll be better, even though it was only 1 or 2 days of practice and it didn't help. And then you keep doing that in so many different areas, hoping to become better than everyone, which isn't realistic at all.
Right, and if you're not good, then you let yourself down.
Yeah. And you say that well, for my personal experience, I'll say that I've just wasted all my time, but in reality, it was a week at most that I had a certain interest and just went after it as much as I could.
Right. And when it comes to the competitive aspect of this, like wanting to be better than somebody else, I feel like just an easy way of doing that is just switching your mindset in the sense that people, whether you like it or not, like people are always changing. They're always growing, they're always developing, and also the people around you are always changing too. It's like you'll have some of your same friends for maybe 1 to 5 or more years, or for a semester or less than that. Like they're just ever changing, but you are always there and you are the constant. You
Right.
are always with yourself. So, and also the fact that you had your own experiences that are completely different than everybody else. So how can you compare, you know? Like
Hmm.
um to use me and you as an example. Like we went through band and everything. We learned how to play drums and the marimba and everything. Like that good piano player, how can we even compare our lives to them when they sacrificed all of their time to work on piano, you know? Like
Right.
that's another thing, just sacrifice in general. It's like at times where we could have had fun or something, you know? Like at a party and felt fulfilled from that. They were
And
working hard on this, so I don't know. It's
a
what
lot
you
of times,
value.
marching band in particular, how you brought that up, I'll see the other people in my section and they'll just be so much better than me. But then I look back and think that that's not my only focus in life. I have more experiences and more wishes than just to be good at snare drum or whatever they're good at.
Yeah, it's all about what you value, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But I guess value should not become an obsession, like how we touched upon earlier.
Well, it's also difficult to assign value to different hobbies or activities because you don't know how long you're going to be interested in them. You don't know how long you're going to have those before you have an injury or something that kicks you out of the sport or activity.
Mm. You know, like when you were starting to say that, it was like I thought you were going down a different path, but yeah, that is interesting. Like if you pursue football for an example, it's like I don't know, if you value it and you're all in, what if you do get hurt and your career's ending? But I mean, and this is my opinion, of course. I feel like you should try to follow your dreams. Like if you love football, you shouldn't focus on, well, what if I tear my ACL and I can't play anymore, you know? Because if you
Yeah.
think too much like that, then you're never going to do anything or take a risk that might change your life, you know?
hmm
So I don't know.
Well,
I guess that's my counter to that.
I had a lot of personal experience like switching sports as a child.
Mhm.
Um, I started in gymnastics and then got so stressed out by the increasing hours as you get up to higher levels that I wasn't able to do my homework and then
Mm.
again be as good in the areas of school. Even though I was still performing at a high level in gymnastics, I decided to quit because I wasn't going to be as good as other people because I had other focus.
Yeah. Well, I guess then when you're in a situation like that, I guess you kind of have to take some time for introspection to kind of evaluate your priorities in life, I guess. You know?
Yeah.
Cuz like that's a really real like predicament, you know?
hmm
Just
I
like
think,
having all these things in our life, like because there's so many aspects and a lot of the time we're always involved with things and it's hard to like find a pause button at at points. Um, but we just have to think about what we prioritize because you're absolutely right. It's like, is doing gymnastics worth it if I'm spending so much time on it and I don't even want to pursue it in the future?
right. And I think going back to what you just said about having time for introspection, the past year with COVID and quarantine has been really helpful, especially just to figure out what I want to do, not because someone else that I see is influencing me and I get to focus on what I want to do. And especially for the first few months of quarantine, I did a lot of art stuff that I wouldn't typically because there's no competitive aspect to it. I don't have any close friends who I would talk to every day who work on art extensively. So that was kind of a thing that I found for myself. And I'm glad I got to do that. And I hope that I'll figure out more things about myself that I just want to pursue in the future.
Yeah, and do you think that was just like you found that from experimentation or whatnot?
I think it was more looking back on what I did when I was younger that I just did for uh, just to think that I was better than anyone else because someone else could draw better than me or paint better.
Hmm.
But then I was able to take that and put it and shed different light on it and make it more of a relaxing activity or just a hobby instead of something I had to refine and become better than others at.
Right. And I think just competitiveness is interesting and just because and I did a whole episode on this too. It's like there's competitiveness against yourself, like being the best you can be, and obviously competitiveness against people, whether they're individuals or groups, you know?
hmm
Um And I feel like there's merit to all of it, but you have to find the merit, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like you can view all of these as negative or crushing or what however you interpret it, Like most insecurities are just really all of psychology, if I'm being honest, is basically interpretive. Besides like the objective like biology of it.
Right.
Other than that, like every concept, like the locus of control or perfectionism, like this is all in your head. Like life can suck horribly. It can be literal hell, or as weird as it might sound and maybe even contradictory to the entire video, perfect. I guess it's just up to your interpretation.
Yeah, that
Um,
makes a lot
yeah.
of sense, and especially when perfection isn't necessarily defined by getting a 100 on a test. It's how well did you perform this? Was it the best you could possibly do? Were there any mistakes?
Mm, Or I guess maybe it's about like satisfaction and fulfillment too.
It definitely plays a role, but just because you had fun or there's a little bit of satisfaction in what you did doesn't mean it was perfect. There
Mm,
you can at least you can set your own standard and achieve it, but it's not necessarily always going to be perfection unless that's what your standard is.
right. And again, I guess I should preface kind of back to a point you said earlier. It really just depends on the situations. Like if you're a doctor, this isn't about your satisfaction or whatever. Like you you need to help your patient. Like
Yeah.
something and that could put a lot of stress on you if you're a doctor. Um well, hmm, let's think about that though. Do they need to be perfectionists?
They don't necessarily need to be perfectionists, but in a situation where you're performing surgery, you want to be as close as perfection as possible so you don't have to go back and do something else that could harm the patient even further.
What do you think is the difference between both these mindsets of like trying to get it perfect and like being a perfectionist?
I think being a perfectionist can definitely lead to a lot more stress because you're just so focused on you have to get everything as best as humanly possible. Whereas striving towards perfection, you tend to understand that you're not going to achieve that, but you're going to do the best you can.
So it's kind of like acknowledgement without the stress, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay. And yeah, like I feel like a lot of jobs like that, you said construction worker or like even architect, like you have to get the measurements right or else the building might fall apart just based on basic physics. Um, like all these instances, or like a math equation. Um, I guess the thing that popped into my head was like the Manhattan Project, where they were developing the atomic bomb, and it's like you needed to get those calculations perfect to get exactly what you wanted, and if you messed up anything, like consider when they were testing the Trinity bomb somewhere in New Mexico. Uh, I forgot where, even though I did a paper on this, but if they had like one calculation wrong, they could have blown themselves up like without even knowing it when they were trying to set it off far away from them.
Yeah, and I think that definitely goes back to the concept of the scale of whatever you're doing. How
Hmm.
important is it? Is it important to just you, or is it something that could affect society as a whole? Like
Right, that's a great point.
your grades aren't affecting anyone much other than you. you're
Mhm.
determining your own future by it, but someone across the world isn't going to die because you got a C in calculus.
Right. Um, so yeah, it definitely depends on how big or really who this affects, you know? Like, I feel like a lot of internal things like grades or just personal success, that is very different than when it's more of a community thing or just
Right.
grand scale. Um, and I would also even suggest that these grand scale things like the atomic bomb, they're not really perfectionists because now that I'm thinking about it, perfectionism seems more just like an internal stigma as an individual. So when you're like working on a group thing, like using this example again, you don't really have time to be insecure about yourself, I guess, when like the Nazis are over there and they're coming. So like you need
Right.
to work with this group right now. Like I don't think you're concerned about being perfect. You're just concerned about we need to make this bomb and we need to make it right now, you know?
Mhm.
Or else like this is going to be really bad. Um
I
and
I
let me
just
just
thought of
say
a
or
good
I was just going to
example.
say real quick that I don't mean to undermine perfectionism as like an insecurity or even like anxiety, you know?
Right.
That is not to put people down in saying that. I'm just saying that it kind of is like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like when your own like survival is at stake, you're gonna be more you're gonna prioritize that more. So that's
Right.
more of what I was gonna say. So what were you going to say? Sorry about that.
What? No, that's fine. I just had a very literal example of when perfectionism is required because
Yeah.
um, I work at the mall. I work at a place that sells tea, and I also just started a job this week where I'm lifeguarding. And those
Hmm.
are two very different scenarios because one, if I mess up, someone has a sad experience, they don't like their tea. Oh
Yeah.
well. And the other, if I'm not perfect at everything I do, someone can end up dying.
Mm.
And there's a lot more stress associated with lifeguarding than just putting things together in a cup and shaking them.
Yeah. Although I would think, or what I'm thinking of right here with this example is, do you think it's that, even though you feel that stress, don't you think it's more of a responsibility than like something weighing on you, if that makes
Yeah,
sense?
and I also feel a responsibility in with the at the mall, responsibility to the customer to not mess up their drink because then they'll be mad at me. And
Hmm.
I can that's relevant for both situations because if you let someone's child drown, they're going to be mad about it, but obviously on a much larger scale.
Yeah. But when you're worrying about something like that, do you think that's less about the insecurity weighing on you and more of just like, okay, I just have to be more careful with this?
I think that's definitely a large portion of the difference.
Yeah, I guess it's just because it affects people versus like your own individual pursuing actions, you know?
Right.
Like tying it back to the grades. This is all this is all you. Like you're playing the game of school. Nobody else is involved, so it's you're basically alone in a room with your own expectations versus like, oh, somebody's disappointed if I serve them the wrong beverage or someone dies. Yeah, I was like, how do I word this gently? I guess.
There isn't
But
really a good way to.
I guess the way that I did it was the most blunt way possible. So yeah. Um. So yeah, with this whole discussion that we've been talking about for all this time, I want to know just like your general thoughts of how can we take action or just I don't know, how can we counteract against perfectionism so we're not consumed by it?
I think that you can definitely um, think less about being perfect and more striving towards something regardless of how attainable it is. Because if your expectation of perfection is a 100%, getting a 90% is a lot closer than getting a 60. So that closeness, even though it's not perfect, you still feel better about yourself, and that relieves a lot of the stress.
Yeah. And maybe
Uh,
you could I don't know, maybe you
also,
could Oh yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
you
Sorry.
can go.
Okay. I was like I felt bad about talking because I asked you the question, but I was just gonna say, like, maybe don't think about it too heavily when you fail.
Right.
So what were you gonna say?
Well, there are just different levels of failing, succeeding. There aren't different levels of being perfect. There's just
Mhm.
one thing, as opposed to a whole scale of possibilities where you can still get better. Once you're perfect, you can't get any better.
Right. And doesn't that kinda suck?
Yeah, because you always think that, oh, I can get extra credit. I can be better than the best piano player in the world.
Well, just like the idea of, if everything was perfect, wouldn't that wouldn't that not be ideal, as funny as that sounds?
Well, if you think about all the novels of sci-fi and futuristic dystopia and everything, or is it utopia? I forget which one is which, where
Utopia.
everything is perfect. Everyone seems to want to break out of that. There's always a story of someone going against the norm. Divergent's a great example. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah.
When there is perfection, there's always uniformity in everything,
Mhm.
and it's just boring. You can't go anywhere with it.
Yeah.
So I think if a few people are striving for perfection, maybe it could be attainable. But if everyone does and achieves it all the time, there's really no point in trying it all anymore.
Yeah. And also, I think just the human experience and this is definitely a glass half full response, so bear that in mind, but, it's all interpretive. But I guess the way I view it is we have to appreciate the bad as much as the good, even though the bad is bad, you know? And to define bad real quick, it's like all the stress, all of the sacrifice we make, the annoying responsibilities we have, our flaws, our insecurities, the external things that we can't control that just weigh us down or bother us, whether it's a slight annoyance to cataclysmic damage to our life that we can't change, like the death of a relative or something like that,
Right.
just completely out of our control. Um, but without it, we can't truly appreciate anything. Like one of the things that I thought about this whole year, like this whole pandemic year, basically, the school year more specifically, was just the idea of time. Because I've thought a lot about like immortality and everything. Of like, as a kid, I used to be like super afraid of death, and I would say that I'm still like relatively afraid of it. But it's like this idea is so frightening that I won't wake up someday and have another day, Like that's just terrifying to me.
I
Um
can't tell if it's more frightening because you won't get to do anything else with your life or because you have no clue what that experience could be like. There's nothing to compare it to.
Exactly, yes.
And I also definitely relate to the being afraid of death, paranoid about it all the time as a child.
Right.
Um, I just combat that now by not thinking about it. And I guess that kind of is encouraging to shift your focus to the present and think about what you're doing now rather
Yeah.
than an inevitable end.
It definitely is frightening. I don't think I can necessarily just quote unquote stop thinking about it. Although I mean others probably can, you know. Um, and obviously I think when you actually get older, you're more okay with it just because you got your bearings basically. Uh, or you're just ready, I guess.
You've also
Um,
just accomplished more with your life. It just, if you die at a young age, everyone always talks about like how much you have to live for in the future and not getting to do what you could have done or just your best. It's scary.
right. Um, but it's like you think about immortality. It's like, okay, I'm afraid of death, so I wish I could live forever. But if I truly think that if every day was good or was perfect or we just had infinite time, we wouldn't bother doing anything. Like it's the fact that we have these time crunches, these deadlines that we get anything done or have the drive to get anything done. If we weren't limited in time, why would we be in school? Why would we try to learn? Why would development matter? Why would we try to be better people? Why would it matter if we were just nihilistic, you know?
Right. 'Cause there's
Um
nothing further to strive for at that point.
yeah, and that is the problem with nihilism right there, but I don't know, it's just the fact that we have good days and bad days, and even just the idea of limited days in general. We need the sadness. We need the I don't know. One example is I just graduated, but one of the bigger impacts of the end of my high school experience was my choir concert. It was my final concert of my first and only year of switching to choir. And I just absolutely loved it. Like I loved the people. If you're listening out there, I love you guys. Um, uh, I loved the opportunity, the experience, and I would say that was a perfect night. You know, like that perfect concert, perfect closure, perfect time hanging out with everybody afterwards. But then I noticed the next day, the music stopped. And what I mean, and that's a phrase I like to say, like, you know, the music stopped, as it's my term for a situation like this where, you know, if you've watched a movie where it's like they're at a party and it's all this loud music and everybody's having fun and dancing, and then it clips to the next scene where it's completely silent and the guy's like depressed alone or something.
Right.
That's the feeling of when the music stops. It's like the part of the movie that it doesn't want to show you.
That's
But
exactly what I was gonna mention, that there's no transition in between those. You don't
yeah,
know, it's not clear what happens all the time.
right.
There's
Unlike a
such a
perfect storybook, life goes on, you know?
there's such a contrast of like the emotional variability in all those situations because when there is a concept of reaching what you've set out to achieve and then you get emotional about that, everything else just doesn't feel as good.
Yeah. And I was gonna say that day afterwards, it was like I felt the blues, man. I felt it. Just you know, just like sitting on the couch doing nothing, kind of being like, "Oh, today kind of sucks," because
Right.
it was almost as if the day prior sucked the life out of this one, you know? But then I noticed, I was in a slump for like the first half of the day. But then I was like, you know what? Like, it really hit me that life goes on. I felt that almost Hamlet inspired, like, to be or not to be, like, kind of idea of, like, why can't life just be a perfect storybook? You know? Like, why
Yeah,
can't I just have my ending? Why does this keep going the way it is? That's not to elicit any, like, bad implications, but take it with a grain of salt. Um, but, just, like, great finale, why am I here alone the next day, you know? Um, but I was like, even though this ended, even though this is great, I'm so glad it happened. And you know what? We're just moving forward now, you know?
that sounds like a cliche every teacher would say, but also it's so relevant because the journey and learning process is so much more important than the final score. Because just to take a sports reference, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's what seemed most readily at hand, if a team is clearly like winning and putting in all their effort and some stroke of bad luck ends up causing their score to be lower than the other teams and they end up losing,
yeah.
is all the effort that they put in, is it pointless?
Mm-hmm. That was a to like go along with it, not like, yeah, it's pointless.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, just that concept is kind of just weird to think about because you think that everyone should the just world phenomenon, everyone should get exactly what they deserve. If someone does the best they can, they should everything they do should be perfect. And if they don't try at all, they should fail everything. And that isn't how it is. And that's difficult to comprehend because you just think that if I do this enough, I'll be better than other people or I'll achieve perfection at something.
Yeah. But here's the thing that perfectionism doesn't tell you, and that you might miss if you're a perfectionist. Take that sports team that worked really hard and failed in the end. It's not useless. It wasn't all for nothing. You might have failed your perfectionist dream. You're too romantic for its own good vision. But think about literally everything you've accomplished. You built strong bonds and a sense of camaraderie with your team and your coach. You worked together. You had to you had a dream that propelled you to motivate you to get better, to literally clean up your act, to work with other people. Like, think about all these skills going on here: cooperation, work ethic, accountability, just overall endurance and strength at play here. Like, strength to keep going. And, like, think about that. These are so
Yeah,
nuanced and underlying that we always forget about them. But
that's
again, it's
exactly
like,
what I was gonna say. They're always overlooked. We don't say, oh, our goal for today is to pass the ball to two teammates. It's to beat the other team to play better than everyone else.
right.
Those small connections are so important in the greater scheme that if we just set goals that say, I'm going to study for 10 minutes instead of I'm going to get an A on my final, there's something that you can actually do about that because those end goals, you can work towards them, but they're not specific things that you can like do better.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's like, I think it's good to have these goals in mind, you know?
Right. But
But yeah.
there needs to be like smaller layers of goals because one
Mhm.
goal can't encompass everything you wanted to do. It's pointless to set something that isn't achievable unless all the other smaller steps work together.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, whether you're a perfectionist or not, when you find when you hit hardships, when you're anxious, when you're upset, when you've been wronged for every justified reason imaginable, like these are bad things. And sometimes you can control it, sometimes you can't. But at the end of the day, like what I'm saying here is they weigh you down. But you always have to get up because even though our time here is limited, there's still another day, you know?
Right. There's
And yeah.
as long as we aren't perfect in every way, which no one will ever be, there's always something we can work on or be better at. And just by making a simple decision at any point in our lives, which is weird to think that we can have so much impact on our future selves just by thinking about something differently or not procrastinating for an extra 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm. I think it's time to what is it? Carpe diem, seize the day. Did I say that right?
I believe so.
It's time to take control again, you know? Take control of our own lives. Like, why are we listening to this unreliable narrator, you know? Like, does the perfectionism insecurity really, like, hold any sense of justifiable authority over us?
It shouldn't, but it still does because, especially in society today, with there's such a competitive atmosphere in school, and I haven't experienced like outside of school because I'm still in high school, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure there's so much competition just to be better than anyone else.
But you remember what we talked about, right? Like, I don't know, at the end of the day, the competition's not permanent. And we're always moving forward and we're always the constant. So as things shift and change, I guess as long as we're learning, we're growing, we're persevering. I know we
And I
can't eliminate our insecurities, but I think we can still get back up, you know?
yeah, I don't want to like leave an argument or something, but
Yeah.
something like your academic record, it's permanent. There's nothing you can do to go back and change it. And many situations like that, like I don't know, the Super Bowl or whatever thing you have, you can't change the outcome of it. And
Right.
everything is permanent to some extent, whether it's you can go back and erase it in the future, but you'll still know it happened.
So what would you do then?
In the erasing scenario,
If you can't change it, what would you do? What do you do?
well, you'd have to just think about it in a different way or justify why you didn't do as well as you thought you could have, and then take that advice or new information that you learned into the future, set smaller goals to work on and then when it comes back around again to like the big game or whatever, you know what to do better that time and you can achieve at a higher standard than you did in the past. And you'll feel much more satisfied with it because you made changes to what you did. And you know that you didn't make those all those same mistakes.
And would you say that growth was perfect?
It's not necessarily perfect, but it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I,
And,
well,
you know,
if you multiply something that didn't exist by anything, it's infinite. So any growth, I guess it could be related to perfection because we think of the concept of infinity as something that's similar to perfection. They're both so ambiguous, but they're there. You understand what the concept is, but it's hard to wrap your head around.
mhm.
So if you made even the smallest change of something that you weren't doing in the first place, does it become perfect?
I guess it's up to you at that point, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, what does perfect mean? Is it the ideal up to your ability? Is it the ideal out of your ability? Just the ideal in general? I guess in the end, it's it's entirely up to you. There is no universal perfection. So I
There
guess
has to
that's
be,
another thing to consider.
yeah. There's, when you think about your concept of perfection and what the literal meaning of perfection is, and then you combine those two in any way, you can form your own understanding of it. But depending on the situation, any of those definitions, so many in between those
Right.
that can be what perfection is.
Yeah. I really like that you said that because it's like there is a definition, but really it's up to you to decide how that's applicable to yourself.
And then when others can use the same definition or a different definition to judge what you've done, you can't always compare it on the same level because if they're saying, oh, well, you didn't do this, but you had something else that you valued way more that you did, or that you changed from a mistake you made in the past, that's so much more meaningful than them saying, you didn't color in the lines on all of these things, but your understanding of the form or shape of an object rather than coloring it in perfectly. It all depends on what you're focusing on in the moment.
Mhm. Yeah. And with that said, we're heading towards the end here, but what do you think is what would you want to leave our audience with for this episode?
Perfection is, although it seems like a very rigid definition of um, what you can achieve that shouldn't be moved, you can define what it means to you because even though that seems like it would just be a simple standard for you to set yourself against, being perfect in all areas is impossible. So if you're perfect in one area that works for you, regardless of how small it is, it can still be perfection and you can still feel accomplished.
Yeah, that's really great. So I guess anyway, thanks so much for joining me. In
Yeah,
this,
thanks for the opportunity.
yeah, I think we had a really great discussion here.
It was interesting, I didn't think the concept of death and immortality would come up, but
Yeah, me neither, frankly.
those honestly, it all related. And I was surprised to see how many concepts can combine to become more relevant.
Right. And I guess just final question because I'm curious. Do you think our conversation helped you? Just
I think it
thinking
did
about it?
because originally coming into this, I was thinking about how much I try to get a 100% on my assignments or, things of that caliber.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm realizing like the small, seemingly meaningless things that I do in my life can be perfect in some way. And I can strive more to look at those in a different way, just and give them the same weight that I would a test or a quiz. They're all important because they all play a role in the decisions that I've made and who I am today.
Yeah. Butterfly effect, right?
Hmm.
That should probably be its own video, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So yeah, this has been Perfectionism, and thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you guys next time.